Okay, howdy y'all. So my professional work is education. I used to teach in high schools and then some colleges in the area, and now I do mostly online education. And since about January, most of my coursework is involving Gutenberg, the new editor for WordPress. So I'll talk a little bit about the end about some of the courses I have on this, and I'd recommend. Most of my stuff I do is development, but I think tonight we're mostly going to be talking about from a user perspective and a site owner perspective or company owner perspective, although I'm happy to answer all your nerdy questions at the end if you have them. So to start off, let's just get an idea of who is in this room. How many of you work with WordPress as a personal or business site and you're the one running and kind of taking ownership of it? Cool. And does that involve editing content on a fairly regular basis? You might change something, you might add some pages. Okay, so then Gutenberg is absolutely going to affect us. How many of you have heard of Gutenberg in the community before tonight or before you saw this talk about? Okay, so we're at the point now with Gutenberg where they really are starting trying to educate everybody on what's going on, but there are plenty of people who still don't really know that it's coming. So you are ahead of the curve and you have a lot of options on how to implement it. And I want to make sure at the end I'll answer questions on what does this mean for your site, for your themes, for your plugins, and all of that. If you have questions, feel free to just shoot your hand up as we go. I might ask to come back to it at the end. My site is wp.zachgordon.com. And I just have some rough notes and links. So any of the resources that I talk about or link to here will be up there. And then later tonight, I will put up the recording of it so that you could see that as well. So the first thing we have to talk about the Gutenberg project is that it's often misunderstood to be just a new editor coming to WordPress. So the editor revamp is a part of the Gutenberg project, but the Gutenberg project is a 3 to 5 year multiple tiered effort by WordPress to completely revamp the editing, customization, publishing experience from the ground up, not only the technology stack there, but the interface and what is even possible. And a lot of this is built around new blocks being the feature content area. So not a widget over here that you could add some places and not other unless your theme supports it, or maybe a little short code here and just big blocks of text in a big text area that I'll show you later that we've all seen. But it's also going to overhaul the customizer, and it will begin to impact what themes are able to do, and also how people are building themes will change. So most of the news we hear about now and what is in the immediate rollout phase, or imminent, I should say, rollout phase, is just the editor portion of this. But after the new editor rolls out, we will then hear about the Gutenberg project continuing with what's coming to the customizer and what will we be able to do there as well. So that's the three-part phase. The editor is being redone, and this is what we'll play around with and talk about mostly tonight, the customizer. And then we don't really know kind of what that third phase will be, but it'll be a lot and everything left over. I would define the Gutenberg editor as basically a drag and drop block-based editor. So what that means is you could drag your content around, and everything now is a block. If you have a paragraph element, that single paragraph, if you have an article with 30 paragraphs, each one of those can be individually manipulated, edited, customized, duplicated, moved, saved for reuse elsewhere. You could also drag stuff around, and they're implementing columns. So this is something, does anybody have columns on their website currently? Is it slightly a pain to edit them? Do you have like little short codes that say col 1 and then you have to put content in between, and if you mess one up then you have like 3 columns becoming 1 columns? Page builders make that a lot easier. So how many people use page builders for their site? Those are great, and we'll talk about those as well tonight. But we've never had this in WordPress before, so it's a pretty big deal that now out of the box, when you go to create a page or a post, you have a drag and drop experience. And the context behind this is WordPress and the kind of organizing folks behind that are very well aware that even Wix and Squarespace give you a much richer editing experience. So they're trying to keep up with the market of software that was built 10 years after WordPress was started and is starting from a much easier ground. So web publishing now has become something that people would expect to be very simple. And when you start with WordPress, it can often not be that. So they're going through this process of the next couple of years revamping everything so that 10 years from now, it's still relevant software out of the box, not to say that it can't do these things already and better with plugins. So the easiest place to see Gutenberg is at wordpress.org/Gutenberg. And they've recently revamped this in a really cool way. So not only is the page that tells you about Gutenberg telling you about Gutenberg, but it's also built in Gutenberg, and you could come in here and play around with and get a feel for how Gutenberg works right out of the box. So this is pretty cool. So if you haven't played with Gutenberg yet, you could go over to wordpress.org and check it out. For some of the new, nerdier folks in the room, this is a project called Frontenberg. So you could actually, if you want to play around with this and implement what they've done on your own site, maybe you have clients that you want to give them a demo testing experience, you could set up a testing site, throw up a bunch of posts and pages that are already done, because a lot of times it's easier for people to have something that's already built before they go doing that. A lot of folks said they run their own sites. How many people also run or build sites for other people? Okay, so a lot of the same. So this Frontenberg project, as well as wordpress.org/Gutenberg, is a great place to check it out. I'll come back here and we'll play with it later, and if you have computers, I'll give you time to just kind of play around and look over someone's shoulder. But they're in the process now of trying to get a lot of user testing on this. So there are some things that are really well fleshed out, like I can move this block up and down, I could drag and drop stuff around. Some of the things are built out to be columns, or we could see this is actually a gallery like we've seen before, but it's optional to do a lot of interesting things in terms of aligning it, making it wider, editing it up. And then some aspects of Gutenberg will still look familiar from WordPress before, right? They haven't rebuilt the gallery. That's probably a down the road 3 to 5 year project eventually. So some of the stuff will look familiar. But the idea of Gutenberg is to get it as close to possible as how it will look on the front end of your site. And this is, we get into terminology like a front-end editor, and this is not that. So if you're used to something like Beaver Builder, where you go to your site and you click edit this page and you're literally looking at that page, this is different. So you'll notice up at the top, once I pop the settings open, that, well, I guess we're not going to see it in this version. There will be a big blue, let me pull up a local copy of it one moment so that you could see. Okay. So I was going to point out the publish button up there. So some things will still look familiar. We'll still see this admin area here. We'll see the Gutenberg editing experience here, and we'll see the publish button. So things like that will still carry over from before. Let's see, what else do we want to mention while we're on this page? Let's talk about these ones. One of the trickier aspects to Gutenberg so far that they're still calling beta or experimental is the use of columns. And I'm actually trying to select the main wrapper column here and having a little bit of trouble, which is kind of why they're calling this still in beta. Hold on now. There we go. Okay. So we can see the columns option. You could toggle between the number of columns, and I'll show you some tricks that you could actually do with single column blocks of content. So this is, again, something out of the box that we haven't had with Gutenberg in the past. And we'll come back to this demo, but this is just to give you a rough idea of what it looks like. And already there are huge suites of blocks being developed that will supplement things that have happened in the past using shortcodes or other things or blocks that WordPress doesn't have out of the box. Out of the box, they have something like 20 to 30 different blocks, everything from embeds using Twitter or YouTube. You just paste in a link and it turns it into its own block, paragraph blocks, images. and they have, I think, a projected list of 60 to 90 that eventually will come. And of course, plugin developers are very eager right now to fill all of those gaps. So if you are a plugin developer, any plugin developers? Crickets, yeah. Go build custom blocks. Now is the time to do it. Now is the time to get those out there, because it's kind of creating a new marketplace in the WordPress ecosystem. So you can see that in action. You're going to start seeing, has anybody seen the Gutenberg, what they're calling the Gutenberg nag, which is a big image that appears in your dashboard in the latest version of WordPress asking you to upgrade to it? Yeah. Yep. Let me bring up a picture of it real quick. Excuse me. Sorry, images are taking a bit longer to load. Bring that back over. Okay, this is what the Gutenberg nag looks like. So you will log into your site once it's updated to one of the 4.9. Anybody, is it .8, .9 version of WordPress? And it will say, we have a new editor coming, try it out. Be careful with this trying, because it can cause some issues of trying it out and then trying to go back. It can cause some issues of trying it out on a live site. So what I would suggest is make sure that you either know how to download a copy of your site and use a tool like Local to run a local install of WordPress, or you ask your hosting company to set you up with a staging environment where you could duplicate your site and test it in a live environment, or in an environment that is not your production site. So if you don't have these setups, I'd really suggest doing it. What they're saying is Gutenberg should work out of the box, but there are a lot of instances, depending on what plugins and how your site was built, and even what theme you're using, that Gutenberg will work to various extents, and in some cases might not have 100% or even 50% compatibility with what you're trying to build. So again, make sure that when you test this out, you are doing it in a staging environment or you've downloaded it locally. But I would suggest that you try it. So this will install a plugin called the Gutenberg Editor plugin. And once it gets worked out and the core team feels that they've gotten all the features fleshed out, with WordPress 5.0, it will ship as part of core. So it will no longer be a plugin. And then automatically when you go to add a new post, it will be enabled. So this is creating a really interesting scenario where a lot of people are really afraid what's going to happen when I manage clients for other people. And all of a sudden they come in and they see this try Gutenberg and they try to click it. Or they don't see any of that because you've gone in ahead of time, but one day WordPress automatically updates or you update it, and now they have a completely new editing experience that may or may not cause problems with their current site. So if you are someone who is in a position of managing sites for other people, this is your responsibility now to set up their sites to be able to either work with Gutenberg, give them a place to test it, or disable it completely. So there's no exact launch date for WordPress, which is a really big change in how WordPress has worked over the last 10 plus years. Over the years, they try to do 3 to 4 updates a year, and they're pretty consistent in terms of time, and those updates vary in terms of what is released because they just release whatever's ready. So WordPress 5.0 is going to be the first time that they don't do this, and they've gone months, if not a year now. It's been quite a while since they were due a major update. And their stance is we're not going to release WordPress 5.0 until this Gutenberg editor is ready and it's built and it's working and we feel confident with it. So when that will happen, we got a bit of a roadmap from Matt Mullenweg, the kind of the main figurehead behind WordPress, that it should be ready about now and it should be testing about now. They want to get millions of sites tested, so this is why we see the Gutenberg nag as a plugin. They're installing it if you have a WordPress.com site. and you use the old school admin editor, they're installing it there, and we'll start getting test results there. They're also asking for people to just give general feedback about it. But there is no real hard set date. So it could be October, it could be July of next year, we're not really sure. But everything that they've announced so far has been pretty progressive, and they release an update of Gutenberg every 2 weeks. So they're moving at a pretty fast clip. It may be as soon as the next month or two that this rolls out, but it might be much longer. And the only answer you're going to officially get is, we'll launch it when it's done. That said, that gives you plenty of time to get ready for it. So I want to talk a little bit about getting ready for it and what that involves. So the first area of this, I think, involves page builders. There are two types of page builders. There are page builders that kick you out of the normal WordPress editing experience, and there are page builders that happen within the normal editing experience. So if you use a page builder or a site builder like Site Origin, has anybody come across this one? Visual Builder, great builder. This happens, you open up Ad Post, and it's all within the admin area, right? It hijacks it, it gives you really great rows and columns. So plugins like this, or page builders, are working to convert themselves over into Gutenberg blocks in large part. So you're going to get Gutenberg, you're going to have your same plugin installed, but instead of being its own custom interface, it's going to be happening within the normal Gutenberg interface. But this is great because, as you saw me tinkering around here, and when you go to play with it, like, the columns in Gutenberg at the moment are not great. And I can't imagine that when they launch, they're going to be as good as a plugin like that has been working on this for years and years and years and years. And this is their bread and butter and what they're all about. So you can expect that, and they've already announced that they're working on Gutenberg compatibility. They'll be ready with 5.0, and that is one type of page builder. Then there are the page builders like Beaver Builder, which when you go edit this with Beaver Builder, it opens a brand new window, takes over the entire thing, and you are editing 100% in their environment. So oftentimes this will show you the header of your site, it'll show you the footer, it'll let you drag and drop stuff around. These editors are going to stay exactly the same. So you'll install Gutenberg, and when you go to edit a page, you'll see Gutenberg with one big block there that says edit in Beaver Builder. Or disable Beaver Builder, and it will switch and import in everything into Gutenberg, sort of. If you have been using a page builder and you have one of the major big ones out there, Elementor, Beaver Builder, what are some other page builders y'all use? Themify, Visual Composer. Most of these have already announced that they are working on efforts to make sure that they're ready for 5.0 whenever that is, and they don't know any better than we do when that's going to happen. So if you have some kind of obscure theme that doesn't have one of the major ones we've talked about, you might want to reach out to them and find out if that's possible. But for the most part, it shouldn't affect you. If you use Beaver Builder, like, don't worry about Gutenberg because you weren't worried about the editor before that. That said, if you are using one of these, you probably want to install a plugin, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that will disable Gutenberg. Or you could have it enabled, but nobody's really going to see it. So it really honestly shouldn't matter whichever direction it goes. You do want to make sure that you do have that latest version installed, right? So you don't want that scenario where their WordPress site gets updated before you've installed the new version of whatever page builder it is, because then things are going to break and have some issues. The one thing I'll mention about page builders in closing, though, is that there is some weirdness between going from a page builder to Gutenberg and then back from Gutenberg into a page builder. If you have a page builder in general and you've turned one off, some of them just kill your content and it's really gnarly. Some of them do a decent job. But for the most part, you can expect that when you turn off a page builder, it will break a lot of your content. And you could probably expect the same thing going from something into Gutenberg or switching from Gutenberg into one of these. So there's not too many ways to avoid that, but just be prepared for it and probably plan to stick with what you've been doing without too many issues. How many people are familiar with advanced custom fields? Okay, so this is a way of building WordPress sites that instead of having one big editor experience, your developers or a plugin will set up a bunch of different ones. Like if we're running an event, instead of seeing a big content area where we could put in information about the event, we'd see a date field, we'd see a location field, we'd see a description field, we'd see, you know, a host, a topic, all of these individual fields. And then on the front end of our site, those would be hard-coded into place by a developer, and it would look perfect and be exactly where it is. Some plugins that give you custom post types, like they might give you a portfolio section for your site, or there's event plugins that do similar things. They might be using custom fields to give you the exact editing experience you need, and then also control how it works on the front end of the site. So these are going to be a little wonky if you try to install Gutenberg on top of them. For the most part, what it does out of the box is it gives you the huge big Gutenberg editor at the top, and then your same fields way down below it. But the problem is if your site is built using advanced custom fields or one of these custom field options, those fields in your theme are hard-coded into place. So if you opened up the Gutenberg editor and you moved images around and you moved pictures around and you tried to set up a gallery here and slide it over here, all that content doesn't show up on your site because it is still hard coding in specific fields that were there before. So it may be an instance of you're seeing the Gutenberg editor, it seems to work in the admin, but your theme isn't showing any of this content. So depending on your level of comfort, if you set this up or if someone else did, you may need to, if you do want to start using Gutenberg, it's going to cause an overhaul of your site. Now, luckily, there are ways to get around this. Advanced Custom Fields has announced that they are creating a really cool block interface. So if you use them, hopefully you've heard this news. But in the past, you used to be able to easily create a field, like a testimonial field, an avatar, et cetera, et cetera. And then those would just be laid out as fields on the page. You could drag and drop them around, have them however you want, and then you'd have to code your theme to show them. Well, now they're giving us a new option, which is to create a block. So you go into the Advanced Custom Field plugin on your site, and you say, I want to create these 10 different blocks. I want to have a testimonial block. I want to have a location block. And then in the Gutenberg editor, they will just show up as blocks. You can move them however you want. And if your site is just showing the content, then it will work. Now, out of the box, in any new projects you're starting, this is great. Use Advanced Custom Fields, use their block feature, and you've got Gutenberg and your custom fields all set up. You don't have to do any coding. It's super easy. It lets you create really rich and customized sites for people, but they can still customize the design a little bit. Where it's a little bit harder is currently existing sites. You're kind of stuck in a situation where my recommendation is don't get Gutenberg installed if you already have these custom fields in place, and wait till they need to redesign and remodify their site. Because trying to take existing custom fields and migrating them into blocks is a process I've spent quite a bit of time with, and I've found it very difficult and not something I would recommend to anyone unless you have a crack development team at your disposal. There are some developers in here I think could probably do it, but for the average user, I would say if you already have sites built this way, let them stay this way, disable Gutenberg for those sections, and keep it that way. And then when they're ready to revamp and put more money into the project, then revisit that. And you could, starting from scratch, even use Advanced Custom Fields with it. So now we have this question about, what about plugin X? So what are some of your favorite plugins, y'all? Just shout them out. Yoast for SEO. Caldera Forms for contact forms. What are some other ones?
Gravity Forms.
Gravity Forms for contact forms. WooCommerce, thank you for mentioning that one. A huge one for selling stuff. Anybody else have e-commerce sites? Yep. Jetpack, a big one from Automatic. Jetpack is a plugin that has like 30 different plugins in it. Yep. What are some other ones? Okay, that's fine. It really varies, right? Some of these plugin developers are potentially going to end of life their plugins. None of the ones that were specifically mentioned, all of these ones here have migration paths. But there are some of the smaller plugins out there for a developer to completely rebuild this and then handle what do I do with old customers who want to be migrated over? Because remember, if you're building with Gutenberg from scratch now, it's going to be a really cool experience. If you're trying to take a site and customize it and tweak it over into Gutenberg, you have some work ahead of you, and plugins are a big part of that. So if you're someone who runs a site with, I shamefully admit, I have like 30 plugins on my main site. You're not really supposed to do that, but honestly, there's so many features, I don't know how to get away with not doing it. You need to manually go through and check these. There is a project, I'll make sure I add a link, I don't have it here, called the Gutenberg Compatibility Project. And one of the major hosting providers in the WordPress space has offered an environment where you could spin up a site and test a huge list of thousands of different plugins and then report back on their compatibility. You could also go back and read this list and look at it. The simplest way is to go to your plugin developer's website, search their blog. Everybody who's doing this is 100% advertising it and making it very public. So if you search for Gravity Forms and Gutenberg compatibility, if you search for Caldera Forms, like this is a perfect example of it here, whatever the plugin is, they're going to have an article about how now with Gutenberg, you can just install a block and everything works perfectly. And if they don't have this, that should be a red flag for you now that we're so close to the point where this stuff needs to be announced. Advanced Custom Fields was probably one of the last major plugins that everybody was wondering about, and they just published this very recently. But they were kind of one of the last ones to the game, and they were like, yeah, we'll do something, but nobody knew what until pretty recently. So it behooves you to go through your list of plugins that you're using on different sites and check what's out there. A lot of them are going to try to work, and if not, this is where the upstarters right now are also looking and seeing who's not updating their Maps plugin, right? Because I'm going to release a Maps block, and it's going to be the best one out there. There's also big suites of blocks. So one of the ones, I'll point this link out later. There are folks that are doing like, yeah, the top 30 blocks that don't come with WordPress, right? And they're trying to bundle them all together. For the most part, though, we're going to be in a situation where your site should continue to work as is, or if you're building something new, most of the stuff is going to have Gutenberg compatibility. Although if you're in a place where you want to all of a sudden turn on Gutenberg, that's where you may hit some issues and you want to look at these plugins and test it out. Oh, that's why I didn't refresh the page. Okay. I need to talk about what your options are for how to enable and disable Gutenberg. So you basically have kind of three paths here. You can install the plugin now, test it out, and then when WordPress core rolls out, Gutenberg will be forced upon you, and it will just be the new editor in WordPress, and you will not have access to the old editor anymore. All right? So that's one path to go down. The other one is installing the Gutenberg ramp plugin, which is built by the folks at Automatic. And this will let you fine-tune what content you want to enable Gutenberg for. So my suggestion, for example, is let's say that you have a site that uses a page builder for all the pages because your pages look really cool and you want to keep using that. But for blog posts, maybe the page builder is too much and you actually want to give them the Gutenberg experience because they could do wide images, they can move stuff around, they could design things. You have some, content editors or yourself that are fairly artistic and given the right tools can do some really cool stuff. So with the Gutenberg ramp plugin, you could say for my pages, disable Gutenberg and I want to keep using my page builder. But for posts, go ahead and enable it and allow it to work here. You could even get super specific and be like, for these pages, turn on Gutenberg, but turn it off for these ones, or for these posts, or for this category, or I have a product section, or I have an event section, and you could fine tune it. And they launched this in part because they knew that people were going to have this situation of, we don't want Gutenberg in all areas. We might only want it in certain ones. So this is the easiest. And what happens is you'll install this before WordPress 5.0 comes out. And then when WordPress 5.0 comes out, whatever is running in Gutenberg ramp, which you'll leave installed, will just override what Gutenberg is doing in core. Right? So you don't have to worry if you have this plugin installed. As soon as 5.0 rolls out, it won't override what this plugin is doing. It's been tested so that this will be the dominant controller of what's going on. So that's one option. And like I said, install this now before, don't wait till like the midnight rollout on a Friday night when 5.0 comes out. Do this now and then you're set. It could roll out, it could automatic update, and you're good to go. Then we have the, there was one I was missing here, I'll add the link up. The Classic Editor plugin. So Gutenberg Ramp will also install this, and a lot of the plugins I'll show you will actually install this behind the scenes. WordPress has decided that it will install the new editor, which is completely rebuilt, and it will remove the code for the old editor. And if you want to use the old editor, you have to use a plugin. So you can't just go into Gutenberg 5.0 and say, disable Gutenberg. If you do that, it will not let you edit your content. So you need to install a plugin called the Classic Editor, which is the normal WordPress editor you're used to seeing, will now be pulled out as a plugin. So if you want to keep using that, you have to have that installed. A lot of plugins out there that control access to Gutenberg will install this plugin for you, or if you don't have it installed, we'll make sure that you do install it. It'll force you to do it. But it's not enough to just in the code say disable this. You need to have this installed. Again, do this before Gutenberg comes out, and this will also override the core decision. There's another one that I'll add a link to. Pretty easy to remember the name though. Disable Gutenberg. The all-in-one complete solution for handling Gutenberg, and I guess by handling they mean killing it completely. This will go above and beyond in installing the Classic Editor, but also removing any mention and making sure that they're not being nagged to install Gutenberg or see that name anywhere in there. And honestly, folks, like we'll get into the controversy of Gutenberg maybe a little bit as we talk more Q&A. But this is a 100% valid effort, right? Like I said, Gutenberg is not a 5.0, we're finished. Gutenberg is going to be rolled out over the next 3 to 5, possibly more years. So one second, and then I'll answer. In my professional opinion, teaching people how to build WordPress sites, there is nothing wrong with during the next year to 2 to 3 year process to decide, okay, this is great, you all keep building that, but I want to keep using what I'm used to on my sites already. Yeah, any question?
This is rather off the wall, but what about WordPress.com users? Will they have an option of sticking with Classic Editor? Yeah, I know that's a great question. So.
Yeah, so WordPress.com, any WordPress.com users? I'm a big fan. My blog is on it. So WordPress.com has a weird thing. They have their own editor called Calypso. So if you go in and you see that light blue editor, you know what I'm talking about? That's going to be there for a while, but they also have a whole WordPress admin area that looks like the old version of WordPress. They will be rolling it out there. And then I imagine they might do a hodgepodge in their main editing experience of adding blocks, but it's going to look a little bit different than WordPress.org version.
Okay, so in the admin area, are we going to have the choice of Classic Editor or Gutenberg, or there's going to be stuff?
No, with .com you're going to be forced overall, but now WordPress.com has opened it up quite a bit to install plugins. So if you have one of the plans that installs plugins, you could actually go in and disable Gutenberg and install the same stuff that I'm talking about here.
$30 a month for the business plan.
For their free version, no, but for their paid versions, yes, you will have that option.
The WordPress.com people, they can answer either. So.
Well, there you go. I got your back, man. Answered. Good question. Okay, so those are kind of your 3 paths, right? Don't do anything and have it be installed. You're going to wake up with 5.0 at some point in the next month to year and see that. You can install Gutenberg Ramp plugin and control where you want it and do that ahead of time. Or you can disable it completely by just installing the Classic Editor or installing one of those disable ones. Again, it's up to you, and it really depends on each site. There's no right answer here in terms of, well, do I need to be using Gutenberg? It's like, well, do you need to be using this plugin? I don't know. It depends on what the goals of your site are and the needs of your user. So it really depends. Okay, last thing here about themes. Technically speaking, Gutenberg will work out of the box with any theme. but it won't be 100% compatible. So there are certain features of Gutenberg, like the ability to make 100% wide images that will only work if your theme supports it. And so if your theme does not have all of these features enabled, when someone goes to do, there we go. Okay, so these are what are called, lost it. Okay, there we go. It's called a cover image, and it has different here we go. Okay, so it could go full width, 100% width, or it could go fairly wide, or it could be narrow, or it could be toggled left and right. So this option of what they call wide width and full width are only enabled if your theme enables them. So you might see them working here on the back end, and you're like, wow, this is so cool, my image is 100% wide, and then you go to the front end of your site, and it doesn't look the same, because remember, Gutenberg is only trying to mimic what's on the front end. And this is purposeful, because you don't necessarily, let's imagine a site altogether now that has a sidebar and a main content area. You don't want all of a sudden you to create an image in the main content area that knocks out the sidebar, lowers it down the page, and rearranges everything, right? So some pages might work or might allow for all the features of Gutenberg, like super wide stuff and narrower here, but some of them won't. It might be an instance of you have a site that has only this much room, like 400 pixels, and you're trying to put in this really wide column thing that just isn't going to look good with your theme. So you do want to make sure that if you want certain things to look a certain way, that you have a Gutenberg compatible theme. Some theme developers are calling this Gutenberg compatible theme. In the WordPress, when you search in your themes area, there's a little thing that says, has this theme been tested with your version of WordPress? The official way that they will mark a theme as Gutenberg compatible from the themes repo is if it has Gutenberg enabled, then they will say this is compatible with WordPress 5.0. And if it doesn't have all the themes, yeah, I'll get you in 1 second. If it doesn't have all the features of allowing Gutenberg features in its full extent, then it will say it is not fully compatible with this version of WordPress. Yeah, there's a question in the back.
Is there a 2018 theme yet, or a beta version or anything available?
Yes, so that's a good question. Normally WordPress comes out with a theme every year, and they've also changed that with the new release cycle. After they rebuild the editor and they rebuild the customizer, then there will be an official theme that supports all of it. How they do that is they use what's called the Gutenberg starter theme. If you've built themes before, anyone heard of underscores? Underscores is a really cool theme that looks, it does nothing out of the box, but every time the WordPress team builds an official WordPress theme, they go back to this, what they call a starter theme, and add all the major building blocks and codes, all the codes. So you download the underscore theme, and it gives you basically all the major templates you want and all the accessibility things, but it doesn't have any styling or anything like that. It's just the core building blocks of what a theme is. So they've forked that underscores, and they've launched the Gutenberg starter theme. And this theme has very little styling. The idea is to as closely replicate the Gutenberg editor as possible. So there's no sidebars with this theme, but there is a little bit of CSS that puts a menu at the top and makes it mobile compatible. So they are working on this project, and at the moment, all of that it does is make sure that most blocks are styled well, and down the road we'll have a 2018, but we don't yet. And it'll probably be a pretty simple theme in terms of its presentation. I'll point out one other theme here. This is the Atomic Blocks theme. This is by a theme shop called Array Themes, which was one of the earlier theme shops to release a Gutenberg compatible theme. And it's very simple. It has a header and then basically a content area that's just one single column. And you can make stuff bigger, you can make stuff smaller, but this is the Gutenberg style out of the box theme that you're gonna see, which is simple, and basically you control everything in Gutenberg, and how it looks in the editor is how it's gonna look on the front of the site. No second sidebars and stuff like that, no 3-column layouts unless they might have a separate page template that has those. So this isn't going to work for every single site out there. You'll definitely see new trends in popular blogs and stuff like that that will follow this. But it may be that actually you don't want Gutenberg full compatibility with your theme because you want to lock it down and not have someone be able to control everything there and change all of that. But down the road, not only will you be able to do this drag and drop block stuff for just the editor, you'll be able to do it for your header, your footer, you'll be able to drag a sidebar through the customizer. So it will evolve over the years. We're just not there yet. Yeah, I want to pause. Let's see, how are we doing time-wise? We're good. Okay, I want to pause here for questions. I'll come back and talk about some Gutenberg courses that my friend Joe and I developed. We have a one for users, so if you're trying to train people, one for theme developers, and then plugin developers if you're trying to build your own custom blocks. But I want to pause before we do that and just answer general questions.
I have a couple of questions. One is you mentioned local installations, so I wonder if you could touch on that. And the other is where I'm coming from is I have not used WordPress. I'm coming from Expression Engine and Text Pattern.
Oh,
so you know how those are set up.
Good old days.
So I don't have a clue about how you do your CSS, change fonts, change colors, layouts. Is that all considered high-level theme work, and Gutenberg doesn't touch on that? How does that work?
Yeah, so how do I want to best answer this knowing what you've come from? You're going to have themes in the same way that you have, but where Expression Engine would have had your channels and your channel fields, that will become the Gutenberg editor. So only within that post or page editing experience are you really going to see it. Everything else that you see on a page, the header, the sidebar, the footer, will all be controlled by your theme and what
and
that
then how
has
do you
running.
modify the theme?
So then we get into the exact same way you always have, which if you're newer to WordPress is a combination of editing certain PHP template files or modifying your CSS. In some ways, if you haven't used WordPress too extensively, I've talked about the customizer coming. I kind of assumed most people have used it, but in terms of the easiest way to edit any theme is to just come in and add extra CSS. So you can do that out of the box with any WordPress site. But to customize a theme right now, it depends on what theme you're doing, and that's part of why this project is rolling out, to create a more uniform way to edit themes. But we can talk later more about like theme development and how you do that, because there's a whole process to it. But all that's going to stay the same as pre-Gutenberg to moving forward.
And the local installation?
Yeah, so there's a great product called Local, and this is from a hosting company, but it's a free product, and you download it, and then you basically set up, so you can set up a bunch of WordPress sites. Like I have a test one for Gutenberg, I have like my main teaching site pulled down locally, and you would use a plugin to download your site. You can install it on your computer, and it will set up a little server. So if I go to Gutenberg.local, this is my local WordPress site. It doesn't need to be connected to the internet, and if I break anything here, sorry, it should load, actually.
So this is installing a web server and MySQL? And all
Yes.
that?
Yep. Yep, it's running Docker behind the scenes for those nerdy folks. Yeah, and it's super easy. It's really well built. It's kind of becoming one of the standard ways for WordPress. We had a question over there, and then some up here.
The general perception of getting out of this is that for my clients who are asking about this, it almost sounds like it's not worth the trouble to take their existing site and migrate it to Gutenberg and just wait for the next redesign to just start over from scratch. But with that in mind, how long is 4.9 going to be supported? The existing environment.
So there are formulas for how WordPress, I don't know off the top of my head, supports it, but you don't want to keep 4.9 installed. You want to install 5.0 and either one of the plugins that will install the classic editor. You don't want to keep an outdated version of WordPress running. But that said, your assessment of like, maybe I just don't need to do this, I think that that's very fair, except in the area of, I think it will be fairly common on sites to maybe give them access on their blog, for instance, is probably the biggest area that Gutenberg can bring an immediate effect. I haven't talked about this, but you could also control what blocks they get quite a bit. So if you don't want them going ballistic, you could be like, you get these 4 blocks, right? And this is all you could do. Or you could control it and be like, if you're an admin, you could get everything. But if you're a user, you can only get these. And there's another really cool feature called block templates, which are, if I go to add a new post, it can automatically put in a bunch of blocks all designed beautifully, just how you want it. And they just go in and fill those out. So you couldn't do that super easily out of the box in WordPress. So you're like, hey, add a new page. And every time it gives them that nice header and designs it. And then if you are trying to limit the client, you could say, set it up so that they can't edit anything else or move it around or ruin it. So those could help. And then I think up here there was a question.
My question.
Oh, cool. Ask it again. Yes, locking it down. So what is and is not possible with Gutenberg and locking it down? You could whitelist blocks and you could blacklist blocks. And you could do that on a per user role basis.
With multi-site, you can do it per site.
Yeah, you could do it by site, multi-site, so that would still work. And then, like I said, you could do these block layouts that are called block templates, and you could either have them be completely open, so it's just the suggestion of where to start and they can change it, or it can be completely locked down so that they can only do that as well. Yeah, I think, does that answer?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you, Zach, for this. I've been using Gutenberg for almost a month now.
What do you think?
And yeah, great. And I still learned a lot of things today because of your presentation and what you explained. So I use it perfectly for almost a month. And about 3 days ago, I realized that my website wasn't working anymore. I couldn't install any content. I couldn't edit any content. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, I have like 3,000. I publish today newsafrica.com, and we publish like 25 stories every day. And we publish pictures and videos and everything, and sound and audio. And I realized I could do all those things with the new Gutenberg. Before I needed plugin I need plugin for sound, I need plugin for videos, I need plugin. I realized I could do all these things. But then my website wasn't working anymore.
Did you find out why? If you can't hear him, he's telling the story of like he's been using Gutenberg for a while. It's great. And then all of a sudden, everything broke on my website and I can't edit anything. And we're about to find out hopefully why.
So I asked WordPress and I see my website doesn't work anymore. They didn't come directly, but they sent someone to talk to me and say, do you have Yoast installed? I said, yes. They said you need to uninstall Yoast, and Yoast will do a big upgrade next week, like this week. And so, and I removed it, and everything went back to normal.
So the solution was you have a certain plugin installed, the Yoast SEO plugin, and you need to uninstall that and it will work. Let me remind you, Gutenberg is not production ready. There's a reason it's a plugin and they're saying try it, right? So this stuff happens and not all plugins are 100% compatible. Now what's interesting about the one you mentioned, it's kind of ironic because Yoast SEO has team members that are directly responsible for building a lot of Gutenberg, and they're actually one of the model companies out there that are trying to make it better. But Yoast has so much stuff that goes like off in the side or has to process in really weird ways. And those who don't know the SEO plugin, it can basically read all of your posts and run pretty complex like SEO analysis on it. Are you using these keywords? Are you doing this? So it has to be able to identify what blocks are being used, how they are. And yeah, I have heard that it's broken things and you have to have a special beta version of their software. So you're running a bit of a risk doing it on a live site, and you don't want to run into this problem where you have a plugin that is going to break everything. But that said, hopefully, like you said, they'll have a new version in 2 weeks, and hopefully we'll fix it.
Yeah. One question: what do you use cover image? What is it used for? The cover image.
The block?
Yeah.
Let me show you some shortcuts. This is one of the cool. Okay, so there's a few ways to add a block. You could add it up here. You could add it right by the line wherever you are. And if you put /, you could just start typing whatever the block name is. So he's asking about this cover image block. And we have some images in here we could use. Cover image allows you to put a title here and then make it wider, super wide. Oh, doesn't that look pretty? I mean, come on, we all want this on our site. This is when people are like, ooh. That's what it does. And people are developing other ones as well that are kind of give you more options over here on the side. Part of the Gutenberg editing experience is if you click on a block, you get more custom options on the side. You could also get all of this, and some plugins will have their own whole other menus, and they've even looked at, like, eventually there'll probably be the option for this to completely take over the whole screen, so you may see it expanded out. Okay, sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. The cover image, that's what you asked about?
Yeah, and do you know why the block delete more doesn't work on post?
No. I'd have to look at your theme. I think it's probably theme related, but I'm not sure. Yeah, some stuff is just shoved down here, like the excerpt. I don't know if this field was filled out, right? So stuff that you might have seen down below before is off on the side. Other question? Yeah.
What are the implications for the widget area?
Yeah, so right now, none. But very shortly, they've already begun working on JS widgets. So basically anything that is a block currently should soon be able to be a widget as well, which will be kind of cool. And some folks like the Visual Studio page builder are also working on the ability to put widgets in as blocks, but that's still a little funky. So nothing in the immediate, but keep an eye on that because the widgets are one of the things they'll tackle as they get into the customizer revamp. Yeah?
Within the blocks, you still have the ability to edit source code, like the visual text tabs?
Yes, so it depends. But yes. So, okay. So each block will have a setting to edit as HTML. So that's really cool. But as a plugin developer, as a block developer, I can also turn off this feature. So if you don't want someone messing up your block and it's a plugin, then there's a chance that they've turned it off. We also have up here an option to, I can't see this tool, code editor, to do this. So this is getting more technical, but the way that blocks are separated is by HTML comments. So every single block has an opening and closing HTML tag before and after it, and that's saved in the database. When this is published to your site, no one's going to see this. If they look at your source code, they won't see this stuff here. But this has, oh man, the nerd in me wants to get into some really interesting things about like React props and attributes and how this stuff is built with JavaScript that we'll save for another time, where you can check out one of my courses. But this is how it's identifying this. So you do want to be careful if you're editing it, because if I do that and then I come back out, notice that anytime you break something, it's going to install, or it's going to switch it over to what's called the classic block, which is, notice this is the classic editor just as a block. So if I were to open up, for example, a page, oh, sorry, yes, the short answer is yeah, you have access to that. I created a page earlier without Gutenberg installed, and because I wanted to show you what this looks like. Yeah, this is perfect. So imagine you have a page and you install Gutenberg for the first time. What you're going to see is this, is that all of your content has been thrown into what's called the classic block, which is the best that they could do to give you the classic editor as a block. And you have a few features to help you. You can convert to blocks, and that is going to, the best it's able, convert that to a paragraph, that a heading, this, that, and anything that it can't figure out, it'll leave in a classic block. If you have plugins that you built, and you use that plugin to build a block, then you uninstall that plugin, it will do its best effort to convert it into raw HTML, but it's likely going to lose all of its CSS and break as well. Yeah. Other questions? Hey, how's it going, man?
You said 60 to 90 blocks out of the box, probably.
Is the goal. Like, I think it's like 30 out of the box.
So,
yeah.
So do you have any point us in the direction of some source that would sort of present some of the fundamental blocks to us a good way. Besides, obviously we go in and play with it, but is there anything that's out there we can look and say, these are some of the best blocks you might familiarize yourself with?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so first let me give you since you're a little more code savvy, let me just show you the Gutenberg block. Is it in packages or was it moved? Yeah, hold on. So in the source code, you could go in and look at every single block. So you can see like the authoritative place to find out what are available is right here, but this is only for developers, y'all. For those developers, the cool thing is that this is all built with React components, so that if you don't like the header block, you could rebuild your own super easy by literally copying a lot of their code and then tweaking it out. There are repos being developed for what blocks and like what suites are out there. Follow me on Twitter, y'all. Shameless plug. I talk a lot about Gutenberg and this stuff, so yeah, watching other people scroll through social media. But I'm gonna forget what I'm looking for. There is a great, okay, I think we're done looking through. Scroll back through mine. One of the links I share out is a repo that WP Tavern recently posted up. And like I said, everybody's trying to revamp their company to get in on the Gutenberg stuff. So one of the things that recently launched was a repo of what plugins are being developed, and also like when you have a suite of 30 plugins, what are in there. And I wish I could pull up the link faster, but if you search around for that, you can find it pretty easily. Yeah.
It was written in React. So is there any, so if you want to do any like custom work or make your own blocks or anything like that, is knowledge of React necessary, and is there documentation for it?
So yes, okay. It's built in React. I don't actually think that you need to know React to do it. When I started off teaching these courses, I was like, man, you got to know JavaScript, you got to know React. And now the course that I have on, the easiest way to do it is to take my course on Gutenberg development. Now I'm kind of the opinion, like when you learned how to customize a theme in the past in WordPress, you didn't really need to know that much PHP. Like you need to know enough to like close the tag and not break things. But I think it's almost at that level with React. Like you don't actually need to know how to build your own React app. Once you learn the basics, I've seen a lot of people already now build custom blocks without ever having formally needed to learn React. If your only experience with JavaScript is sort of maybe I've done a little jQuery, slid this out, so that there's a bit more to learn. But the cool thing I really do feel is that, I don't know, Matt Mullenweg said a while ago, learn JavaScript deeply. That's been like my whole marketing thing. Turns out he was wrong. You can get by with just learning a teeny bit. So, yeah. And yeah, check this out. This might be helpful. In terms of resources, the Gutenberg handbook is the #1 out there. It has been getting better. This is linked to from wordpress.org/Gutenberg, that main page I gave you. This is being built out more and more. Unfortunately, some of this is like automatic documentation that just pulls out the comments from the source code. Like if I come into, some of these are going to be better than that. Yeah, see what I mean? Like it kind of has a little bit more of a like this is not a tutorial, but also, all the developers now are writing Gutenberg tutorials, so there's resources for you, and luckily we don't need to know too much. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that this is going to be in development for many years now. From what I understand, currently all of those blocks are built out, like you said, as HTML tags, and that is a React program that's sitting on top of it's going to fill that, and all get shoved into post-content attribute database, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to take over more of the database stuff in the future with the build, or is that basically going to be all get shoved in that one attribute and that's it?
I'm speculating that yes, but so this is I don't know if everybody understands what he's asking. Right now, you could go in and we saw like all the blocks are divided by HTML tags. So in the database, it's only one entry. They're not saving every block as its own entry, except in a few cases. So this is a problem because it would be a really big undertaking to overhaul WordPress's database architecture and not break, a third of the internet. So there are some private individuals or some plugin developers that have built this where basically they're starting to tag stuff and finding more ways to pull it out. By the time it gets later on down the road, they are going to need a way to do a little bit more of this, but there is zero talk of like the official development and what's being written about that this is happening. So for the most part, that approach will probably continue.
So it'd be like extending it like a WordPress, for example, and add tables for that particular piece of it.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't know how they would do it. I'm really curious, but eventually it's going to have to, but we'll see. It's not going to be in the next year or two. Anybody have questions about like their particular site, if something's going to break, if something's not, if they're concerned about a client thing or interactions in that regard?
A couple times you mentioned how important it was to install a plugin prior to 5 coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Is that mandatory, or if we don't do anything, we wake up year 5, are we in trouble if we want to avoid any?
Potentially quite so, yes. The nice thing is WordPress does not do automatic updates for major releases. So if you've seen like your most hosting providers now will force WordPress to update minor things automatically. It will not update automatically, but it will nag you, and once you do it, yeah, you might be in trouble. Yeah. In the back there, yeah.
So the person's had a plugin, maybe push to the calendar, specifically ones that I use. So no way to be able to work with Gutenberg. Where do we go here? Just go to the web page.
Yeah, the best way is to contact the plugin developer. If it's on the repo, search, and somebody's probably already asked in the forums there in the repo. If not, reach out to them directly and ask. You might save yourself a step and just check their blog if it's a bigger plugin, because they've probably written about it. But yeah, reaching out directly. I think there was one here. Tara, cut us off at any point if we. Okay.
So I have a custom-built theme. Am I going to have a problem? It's not a WordPress theme. This woman made it for me a couple of years ago. Do I need to get in touch with her and figure out if it's going to be compatible?
Do you have a way to like set up a staging or test version of your site?
I mean, like in GoDaddy, just that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd look into it, because there's a chance that once you install the plugin, most of it will work. I think if it goes right, the only thing that won't work with your theme is that you can't do the super wide stuff, because your theme doesn't have the CSS and it has to turn on the support for that. So that's like the best scenario. Otherwise, yeah, it also depends on what other plugins were installed. But for the most part, it's been surprisingly good. Like themes should continue to work. They just might not give you all the features. Yeah.
So we test our site today, and so how confident can we be that when the final Gutenberg comes out that it's going to still work?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so Gutenberg is being updated every 2 weeks. I've been working with it nonstop since January, and for the most part, they've done a really good job about not breaking anything previously. I've been like surprised how well they've done. But that said, it will change, so I'd probably go in and check stuff out one more time right when it comes down the road, because there's a lot of iterations happening. But luckily, most of it is like you're going to go back and be like, oh, this is nicer to use. Columns works better now. It should be good things. Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry, hold on. There's one back there, and then come back up to you.
If we are trying out Gutenberg before the release and we have suggestions as to how it could be better, how could we submit those suggestions?
Yeah, so since Gutenberg is a plugin, it's on the repo, and you could add your feedback and comments there. It is also on GitHub, so suggestions can be added there as well. There's also social media where you could get on and just yell to the general public, #WordPress, #Gutenberg. Honestly, in terms of like having an impact, the only time I've seen people have an impact on the development of what's really happening is if they go into the GitHub project for it. That is just
Say something like github.com/WordPress/Gutenberg.
like that. And if you open a specific issue and you say, look, I have this scenario, here's how you create it. I really think that this should be done differently. I've seen actually quite a bit of people influence that in a positive direction, because it's really interesting. The people building Gutenberg, for the most part, were not WordPress users. They were hired because they're JavaScript developers, and then they came over and built this for WordPress. So it's really fascinating that like several of the main lead developers, like they don't use WordPress. They don't know about all of these issues. So they're very open to that feedback. That said, honestly, if you just hate it and don't want it to happen, which seems to be like by and large most of the feedback that's the loudest, like good. I don't know, like you could just put that anywhere because it's probably not going to do much good.
You want to be constructive.
Yeah, if you want to be constructive, this is probably the only way. Well, this is if you're technical this way. .org/plugins Gutenberg. That didn't, no, it isn't right. That's also not right. Whatever, it's there. You can leave comments here, but honestly, I don't know what good it's going to do, but there's a lot of them. So this is worth mentioning. There has been a lot of controversy about this. I don't know, like, I'm ridiculously plugged into the WordPress world. It's kind of embarrassingly so. Like, I need more of a life. It's brutal out there, and like people are really opinionated, like losing serious sleep. Not because it's actually like going to matter on their projects, right? You could just disable it, but like really upset about it. Like, look at this. This is kind. We hate it. We hate it. Stop. Just don't install it. Like, let it get better.
I think a better news there is the fact that the classic editor is actually growing faster in terms of installs than the Gutenberg plugin, which is, I think, users indicate doing a count by installations.
Yeah, so more people, you're saying, are installing the classic editor, getting ready to not have Gutenberg enabled, as opposed to those who do have it. Yeah, that doesn't super surprise me, because if go try to use it and build something with columns. Like, that's all I'll say about that. Like, give it some time. But at the same time, they're going to need 3 to 5 years to build this out. The team that's doing this is so small, and they've been doing a great job. So I'd like be careful on the hate speech and like just, well, it's not hate speech, but saying hate in it, right? Because they need time to do this. And most people are feeling like it's being forced, and it's the real issue of like, well, why are you installing it if it's not finished? And they're saying, we're not. Like, give us this feedback, we're going to fix it, and then we will install it. So it's not like it's coming next month, no matter whether you like it or not. Yeah. Oh, so the thing I was going to mention is that there is a part of the community that's decided they are forking WordPress, which means that they are Classic Press, which is part of the community has decided that they are going to take all the WordPress code and take their own project with it and continue to support it and never let Gutenberg be installed in it. I honestly don't know how long this is going to last, or how much you want to put your business like goals on those few people doing that, when you could just uninstall it and it does the same thing and you have the same core team doing it. I'm sorry?
Sounds like the Reformation.
Yeah, the Gutenberg Reformation. I mean, it's kind of timely and funny, right? Like they maybe picked a good name. Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
You want me to type it for you? Hold on.
I want to make a comment.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know coding, I don't know HTML, I don't know CSS, In school, I learned journalism, and so I write stories every day. But so when I installed Gutenberg, it was really hard. I felt it was really a bad thing. It was awful because I couldn't use it. It was hard to use it. And so I uninstalled it. But I felt WordPress should know better, so I installed it again. And I did it like 3 times. So someone asked, what if we don't do anything? Are we going to be in trouble if there's an automatic update? I say yes, because we need time to really learn how to use it. When you post or edit article with your laptop, it's different from doing it on your phone. I had to learn to do some things with my phone. Where do I put the caption if I have a picture? Where do I add the video? How do I move the video, the text? And I realized that I could do it on my phone. It was a bit different, so you will need some time for you to learn how to do those things on your phone and also learn how to do them on your laptop. Overall, I realized that there were like 50 things I couldn't do with the classic editor that I'm able to do with the new Gutenberg. Like literally everything. I was using a lot of plugins to do different things. And sometimes when you write an article, you have like 12 paragraphs. And I realized after reading the article that the 8th paragraph should actually be the 2nd paragraph. Usually I would copy it and try to move it up. And now we give me the option to just click and then move it up. And sometimes I play with the article. So I said, no, it should be on the 3rd paragraph, and then it should be on the 2nd paragraph. And so I play with it. It gives you flexibility to do it. Same thing with the picture, same thing with the video.
I'm gonna jump back in. Folks, you know who to talk to afterwards. This man right here. Been using it a lot, and I think that you make a great point, which is some things are a lot more possible. Before we do end, there are like 2 little tricks with Gutenberg that you might not know about that I want to make sure I share with you. One is if you have a paragraph of text, you can't make it super wide like you can with some of the other images like this. So the trick is to add a column, which they say, sorry. Right, it says still in beta. Add a column, and you can't toggle, you can't drag to one column, but you can retype it to be one. And then you could add whatever you want inside of here. And now, if I select the entire column, now I can make it all 100% width. So remember, single block columns or single width columns, you can't drag it, but you could do that little hack. The other cool thing about this is that if I want to start putting other things inside of my column, like let's just put an image in here real quick. Oh, this is the online one. We're going to pretend there's an image. I don't think we have access to the media library. The other cool thing is that they have what are called reusable blocks. So I can grab this entire block here and add it to the reusable blocks. And this is great. So let's imagine this was a call to action, and down later in my post, or even if I were to open up another page right now, I can now have my call. Sorry, it's hard to type on one and see. Uh-oh. Doesn't that work?
You call it use me again.
Use me again.
Yeah, so if you remember what you typed it as. Come on, Gutenberg live demo, man, don't fail me now. I was having some problems with this and reusable blocks. Whatever, trust me, it works. So the cool thing is that you can reuse the same block, and this is the one exception to some of that database storage, is that it will save these a little bit differently in reference. So I could change it in one place, and on every single post, it will automatically update all of those. So that's a really cool hack that you could do. And the spacer block. This is probably my favorite block out there, because what happens when you start designing with blocks is that stuff doesn't look quite right. And then you have to know CSS to get it pictured. And you're like 80% there, but it doesn't look good yet. So these spacer blocks are so beautiful. And I you're probably going to use them more than you want to. It's going to be a little silly how often they're in there, but they make stuff so nice. So those are kind of my 2 little tips for you in play.
The output, the GIF trim?
No, it's the output like just a GIF. It's CSS spacing that gets cut off on mobile, unfortunately. So I don't know about that, but yeah.
Can you customize the interface itself? Because I noticed that sometimes it's hard to see some of the actual elements when you're having to hover over them. So are you able to control that?
If you know CSS, you could customize anything about how this looks.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm building my own Gutenberg block, is it possible to make it available on custom post types, on certain custom post types, not others?
Yep. If you have the Gutenberg ramp plugin, if you're using custom post types, they have to be REST API enabled because Gutenberg is 100% REST API powered. So if you use a plugin like Custom Post Types UI, that is one of the features, is like a drop down and it says enable in the REST API. That has to be turned on, otherwise it won't work. But otherwise, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any concern about slowing down the website on the front end, using a lot of blocks in the especially the model of the rest?
Yeah, good question. So the question is are there any concerns about slowing down the front end of your site with Gutenberg? And no more than there has been in the past. Like big images are going to mess it up. Locally hosted videos are going to be an issue. If you install a CDN, it will do the exact same stuff. Because from the front end of your site perspective, there's zero change with Gutenberg. Gutenberg at this point is 100% the editor only, and then it's still dumping out the same content on the front end. Yeah, one weird thing is that it doesn't, it makes all your videos responsive on the back end. Like if you put a YouTube thing, you can make it big, but it doesn't work on the front end. So there are some areas where out of the box, like Gutenberg might actually show you something that your theme isn't doing. So there are some weird things there, but that's it. Yeah. All right, last question, my friend.
Yeah. It's great that it seems like you can disable a lot of blocks. That's easy just to call Gutenberg into an existing website if you're a developer. But for ramping up back-end users who don't know what Gutenberg is, maybe barely know what WordPress is, give me an idea about launch of 5.0 if they're going to have any sort of like tutorials or things like that to just orient people with blocks, because right now, especially so much stuff's dependent on hover events. I think for the average person who isn't aware of things might be kind of tough to ramp up.
I do know that they have been in the works on trying to develop educational materials to go alongside with this. When you first install it, there's now a library that they built for helper things, like they walk you through what different things are. So there's going to be that, which isn't a ton, but it's probably going to be things like Gutenberg.courses, and my buddy Joe is the one who did that. There's some courses on Udemy too that you're probably going to like white label and give to your clients, because no, as far as I know officially, that has already been officially like announced, there are no training resources that they're providing to this. They're just going to have it installed and have a little like, click here to start adding blocks. But if all goes well, that should be all they need. But beyond that, yeah, not much else. So thanks, y'all. Feel free to reach out through Gutenberg.courses, or you can find me, Z Gordon, on Twitter, the wp.zachgordon.com. I will post up the link to this video. And I've been using this stuff a lot, so if you have questions about implementation or stuff that didn't come out tonight, please let me know. It's Sam, right? Simon. Ask Simon about anything else involving editing. And good luck, y'all. Thanks.